So a lot of boxing happened over the weekend, but the one video I did right after Saturday's night of fights wasn't even based around something that happened in the ring. So now let's talk about that Fabio Wardley versus Justis Huni fight for the WBA interim heavyweight title. I did briefly mention what that fight was in my last video that was more focused on a different topic. I basically said that was Justis Huni boxing the bleeding head off of Fabio Wardley for 10 rounds and ultimately getting chinned before he could reach the final bell. Now look, I always rated Justis Huni's boxing skills, but I also always said that he lacks power and a chin for a heavyweight. And if you've been watching my content, although this isn't a unique viewpoint at all, you'll know that I thought this fight would either end in a Fabio Wardley knockout or a Justis Huni points win. As Huni is the much more technically refined boxer, defensively sound, a good mover, and puts his punches together nicely so he can outbox Wardley, but Huni probably lacks the power to stop Wardley, and because of Huni's suspect chin that we saw in the Kevin Lorena fight, and a bit of leaked sparring footage that I didn't actually mention in any of my videos before the fight, and obviously the fact that Wardley is an explosive and dynamic heavyweight with good punch power, Wardley can very well knock Huni out despite his technical inferiority. It's heavyweight boxing at the end of the day. And yes, we saw Huni outbox Wardley to where he was well on his way to a points win. Then Wardley did actually knock Huni out. So as for the question in the title, was the fight bad for both men? That's awfully negative, isn't it? And why be so negative about such a great night of boxing that both men have stuff to be proud of coming out of? That was Wardley's big homecoming fight at Portman Road Stadium in front of the Ipswich faithful. It was a big crowd. But Huni came in as the underdog in his biggest fight by far to that point, and he boxed so well. Gave Wardley a boxing lesson like he promised at the press conference. He was tagging Wardley with right hands at will, mixing it into the body, moving well, good jabs, displayed a good guard, nice head movement. It was beautiful boxing. But then after hanging in there for 10 rounds and having the grit and heart to take the beating, Wardley pulled it out of the bag and landed a great counter right hand for a come from behind knockout victory that had his hometown crowd and the whole British boxing community roaring. Wardley showed that he can do whatever it takes for the win. But here's the thing. Going into the fight, or not even just this fight, when talking about both Fabio Wardley and Justis Huni in general, we talk about both of their aforementioned drawbacks. Wardley's lack of technical boxing ability in the way of responsible defense and everything due to his lack of experience. You know, he went pro after only having a couple of white collar fights or whatever. And for Huni, you got the lack of heavyweight power and a chin. And now, both of these guys came into this fight undefeated, with Wardley ranked number 1 in the WBA and Huni ranked number 1 in the WBO. So although both fighters had a lot to lose, it's not as if whoever lost this fight would be done for now, would they? Both up and coming undefeated heavyweights yet to challenge for a world title. And the way the heavyweights are mixing it in as a result of Riyadh season, the O doesn't mean much. You can bounce back from an L. Also, as for the two men's weaknesses, look how many heavyweight champions of the past had weaknesses, but had success due to how they played on their strengths. But the issue with this fight is that both fighters' weaknesses or drawbacks or whatever you want to call it, were both brought to light to the greatest extent possible in their fight against each other, dare I say. Again, credit to Huni for how well he boxed before the ending, I really mean that. But Fabio Wardley got gassed out in the 3rd round. He doesn't keep his hands up properly and doesn't have the head movement or just movement in general to support that lack of guard. Unless that was all due to his fatigue in the fight, but that would still be a big problem of course. And he wasn't doing a good job of setting up his punches. Apart from the last one of course. And Huni, as for the lack of power, look, Wardley was so exhausted in there, but he was eating flush right hands from Huni like it was nothing at times. Not like it was nothing, but Wardley didn't look buzzed, significantly wobbly legged, nor on his way to going down. And remember, this is heavyweight boxing. The state that Wardley was in that fight, with another man in front of him, you might have thought Wardley was on his way to being stopped. But it almost seemed as if Wardley just didn't bother to defend some of those right hands from Huni, or just punches in general. It's like, due to how tired Wardley was, and his lack of boxing fundamentals, he couldn't defend the right hand properly without expending too much energy, so he kind of just opted to take the punch. I'm watching it live, I will admit, I thought Huni was boxing his way to a win, but for that reason, Wardley almost not bothering to defend, I was confident that Wardley wasn't going to be stopped. Wardley would also just tuck his chin in with his hands down to just eat a clean left hook from Justis Huni, and you know he wouldn't be able to get away with that against other heavyweights. I haven't watched any Fabio Wardley interviews from after the fight, but I bet if he was asked if he felt Huni's power in there, he would have said something along the lines of, not really. Those who have kept up with the post-fight interviews, please do let me know in the comments if such a question was posed to Wardley. And as for the chin stuff, yes, this is heavyweight boxing. Anyone can be stopped with a punch out of nowhere. Top heavyweights of the past have done good things in their careers after being knocked out. Ken Norton got stopped badly by George Foreman early in the fight before ever going on to become a world champion. Buster Douglas got stopped twice before ever challenging for a world title, and subsequently had been stopped 3 times before winning the undisputed title from Mike Tyson. Vladimir Klitschko got stopped 3 times before ever winning or even challenging for a world title that was universally recognised at the time, and names such as George Foreman himself, Mike Tyson himself, Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield and Anthony Joshua have all gone on to become world heavyweight champions again after having been stopped. And most of all, it was a peach of a counter right hand that Wardley landed to close the night. But let's not act like, with all the questions around Huni's chin coming into the fight, that it's not rather discouraging that he can be completely outboxing someone and literally winning every round and then just be put down and stopped like that, with the first real clean power punch he took to the head in the fight. Unfortunately, I'm not too comfortable just going with the "oh, it's just heavyweight boxing" cliche in this instance, especially given that Wardley's power decreases throughout the fight, unlike a Deontay Wilder. And I do like Justis Huni, and I rate his boxing skills highly. I enjoy watching him box, and I like to see him as a world champion. So trust me, I say all that stuff about his lack of power and lack of chin with no smile on my face. Trust me, there was no smile on my face when Huni got knocked out. There's something about the way Huni's legs go when he gets hit. They go shaky and there's nothing he could do about it. It's such a shame because of how well he can box. The little tight left hook Wardley landed in round 3 that had the crowd going crazy, probably the second cleanest shot Huni took in the fight other than the final blow. Although Huni was okay afterwards and still on point, blocking punches well and moving his head, and the crowd probably overreacted to this shot, and Wardley's failed follow-up to that shot that he landed leading to him being gassed out, there still was a little jiggle from Huni after the shot that made him look very vulnerable for a second. And a better boxer than Wardley could have picked his punches better to follow up accordingly to stop Huni. But Wardley couldn't pick his punches too well, so Huni could hang in there for another 7 rounds before ultimately getting stopped. So I recently did a video saying that Johnny Fisher will never even become a British champion due to his loss to Dave Allen in their rematch, and I still stand by that, of course. But Fabio Wardley and Justis Huni are guys who are tipped to be world champions, and because of the way Fabio Wardley got outboxed and the way Justis Huni got chinned, I'm not going to say that both of them will never become a world champion. Both of them definitely could pick up a world title at heavyweight, but due to the limitations on display, I'm comfortable saying that neither of them will ever be the man at heavyweight. Neither of them will be undisputed champs, nor will they be guys that are recognised as the main world heavyweight champ if they do pick up one of the belts. It's not as if people would have tipped either man to go on to become the best heavyweight in the world at a certain point in time anyway, but now I'd say no chance. And although both of them could definitely be a world champ, it would have to be against the right opponent and under the right circumstance, i.e. a unified or undisputed champion gets stripped of a belt and they get a vacant title fight against someone who they can pull off the win against. On that note, coming up in July, we have the rematch between Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dubois. I picked Usyk to win that fight and become the undisputed champion again, but whoever wins that fight anyway, I would most certainly pick them to beat either Fabio Wardley or Justis Huni. Because Wardley actually won on the weekend and is the WBA interim champ right now, the full WBA title will of course be held by the winner of Usyk Dubois 2, let's look at Wardley's chances against the two guys fighting for undisputed next month. So yes, Usyk already beat Dubois, and I predict Usyk to win again in the rematch, and a lot of people say that nobody can beat Usyk apart from Father Time, i.e. when he gets old and comes up against a hungrier fighter with less miles on the clock, they might be able to beat a more worn out version of Usyk. And for that reason, everyone called for Usyk to retire after he beat Tyson Fury in the rematch. He was a few weeks shy of 38 years old at that point, and now he's 38 and a half years old going into the Dubois rematch. So let's say if Wardley fights a 39-year-old Usyk with even more miles on the clock, I still pick that version of Usyk to pick apart and tee off on Fabio Wardley. Before the Wardley vs Huni fight, I would have picked Usyk points over Wardley, but with the amount of times Wardley got hit flush by Huni, and with how quickly Wardley got tired in that fight, I would pick Usyk to stop Wardley now. And Wardley ain't pulling no KO out of the bag against Usyk, because Usyk ain't lunging in with a backhand with his lead hand low the way Huni did when he got careless in that 10th round. As for a potential matchup between Fabio Wardley and Daniel Dubois now, the thing everyone says about Wardley is that he's not so technically refined due to his lack of amateur experience. But Daniel Dubois, he boxed as a young child. He was an accomplished junior and senior amateur who turned over pro at 19 years old and was sparring all the best heavyweights from young. So Dubois can really box, and he's defeated Anthony Joshua and mixed it in with boxers who have superior skill sets to Fabio Wardley. And as for the puncher's chance talk, let me just say now that I reckon Daniel Dubois walks through the shot that Wardley knocked Huni out with. Now, it might stumble Dubois back a bit, don't get me wrong, but Dubois wouldn't go down from that shot in my opinion. Dubois has been stopped twice in the past, but he quit both times. We gave him the benefit of the doubt against Joyce because of the eye injury, but against Usyk, he quit in the 9th round because he was getting so handily outboxed and continuously beaten to the punch at that point, and that was looking to keep up for the next 3.5 rounds. Some people think Dubois is past the quitting now anyway due to the run he's been on since the first Usyk fight. But even if he does still have it in him to quit, Wardley is hardly going to outbox Dubois and frustrate him and beat him to the punch until he quits. Wardley is an unorthodox, tough and explosive puncher, but I don't see him doing to Dubois what Usyk or even Joe Joyce did. Joyce was a problem back then, you guys. Wardley will land on Dubois for sure, but I think Dubois has the chin to take Wardley's shots, and Dubois would be the one landing the more punches in that fight. So in a hypothetical Wardley vs Dubois matchup, I'd say Dubois gives Wardley a 12-round beating and wins a fairly wide unanimous decision, scoring a knockdown or 2. But this is the thing. As for me saying that Wardley definitely can become a world champion of some variety, he might not even need to win a vacant title fight to become a world champ. If the winner of Usyk vs Dubois 2 has something else on the agenda after becoming undisputed champ that doesn't involve defending against their WBA mandatory in Fabio Wardley, then Wardley could get upgraded from interim champ to full champ. Now let's have it right. Usyk most likely beats Dubois again, and Usyk is the one who'd be less likely to fight Fabio Wardley next if he does win in July, as Usyk probably only has one fight left, so he'd go for something bigger than Wardley. Joseph Parker hopefully. And if Frank Warren's boy Daniel Dubois loses to Usyk again, Warren will push for the WBA to enforce his boy Fabio Wardley as the next mandatory challenger for the undisputed champion Alexander Usyk. Then if Usyk does not fight Wardley, Wardley will be upgraded to full world champion. Maybe. The problem is, we are talking about the WBA here. IBF, WBC and WBO interim champs just get upgraded to full world champ when the full world champion of their division vacates the belt or is stripped of the belt before fighting the interim champ. Simple as that. But to keep things nice and complicated, the WBA have 2 world title belts per weight class, the regular title and the super title. The WBA super champ at heavyweight being Alexander Usyk and the regular champ being the Now Kubrat Pulev. So as the interim champ, is Fabio Wardley in line for Usyk's belt or for Pulev's belt? Because the regular title is better than the interim title, right? So does that mean that Pulev is more so Usyk's mandatory than Wardley is? Look, as much as I'm a bored little nerd who gets into these sort of boxing politics quite a bit, unfortunately, I'm not privy to the intricacies of WBA interim title status. The only relatively recent example off the top of my head of a WBA interim champ being upgraded was Jamal James at welterweight, and he was upgraded from WBA interim champ to WBA regular champ, as opposed to the super champ. So I guess Wardley is going to have to defeat Kubrat Pulev in order to eventually be upgraded to the main WBA heavyweight champion, which he's definitely more than capable of. And if Wardley had to fight a Michael Hunter or something in a vacant regular title fight, Wardley can definitely get the win. So yes, Wardley is very capable of winning a version of the world heavyweight title, and he possibly won't even have to step in the ring from this point to become a world heavyweight champion. I reckon that could be the case if neither Pulev nor Usyk agree to fight him. As for Justis Huni, forget about matching him up with a specific opponent that he'd potentially fight for the title. I don't want to be too dramatic here, but what Saturday told me is that Huni is a tremendous boxer, but he's literally going to have to fight the perfect fight for 12 rounds to beat anyone at top level. Because once he gets caught, it's just peak for him. And he doesn't seem to have a great finishing ability. Definitely not because of poor punch selection, but he unfortunately seems to be devoid of natural heavyweight power as aforementioned. It won't be impossible for him now because he pretty much fought the perfect fight against Wardley for 9.5 rounds, so doing it for 12 isn't really unfeasible. And when you weigh up Huni's chances of fighting that fight against other contenders, well, there are contenders up there who are better boxers than Wardley and might not get outboxed to that extent, but there are also contenders who don't hit as hard as Wardley, so it's a toss-up. There are contenders who Huni might be able to outbox without getting chinned. If the world heavyweight title belts fully get scattered and Huni is in the mix of fighting for vacant titles or challenging a world champ who holds one belt, I give Huni a good 50-50 chance of picking up a world heavyweight title belt. But again, the circumstances have to be right. As for the early stoppage talks, it was very suspect the way the camera panned away from the ring and the referee started counting all fast after Huni went down. But the thing is, if you actually count it, Huni wasn't fully on his feet with his hands up ready to fight within 10 seconds of hitting the canvas. So by the actual rules, Huni wasn't cheated here, which is why his management team will most likely fail that appeal that they made to the WBA. But in boxing, referees apply the rules in a certain way based on how the fight is going. i.e. given a slower count to give a guy a fighting chance for a certain reason. In this instance, the reason that we reckon Huni should have been given a fighting chance is because he was well ahead on the cards and was boxing his way to a win. And given how tired Wardley was at that point, despite Huni's lack of punch resistance, Huni could very well have made it out of the round and survived another 2 against a very faded Wardley. But referees moving the goalpost with the counting unfortunately has more to do with the A-side, B-side stuff as opposed to how the fight is actually going. Wardley was the big British star in this instance. He was having his big stadium homecoming, and most of all, he was the betting favourite. I highlighted this boxing trope recently in my reaction to Johnny Fisher vs Dave Allen 2. Johnny Fisher was the A-side there and didn't just get caught with a punch from out of nowhere like Huni did. Fisher was getting knocked about the place by Allen already before that first knockdown. And in that video I said, trust me, if the roles were reversed and Dave Allen was in the state that Fisher was in after the first knockdown, barely had the wherewithal to stand up straight, Allen would not have been given the same fighting chance. But referee Marcus McDonnell let the A-side in Fisher box on. Then Fisher got brained right after. And I compared that to another Marcus McDonnell refereed heavyweight bout in AJ vs Dubois. AJ was the big A-side there and he got an insane fighting chance on multiple occasions in that fight that a B-side would never. And AJ did ultimately get absolutely brained too. I ain't complaining about no late stoppages, don't get me wrong, but I just wish the same energy was kept on both sides in regards to fighting chances. Boy was John Latham eager to count Justis Huni out and wave the fight off. I know Wardley landed that lovely counterpunch that officially put Huni down for the 10 count, but all things considered, Wardley got a bit of a gift here. The funny thing is, in the case of AJ vs Dubois and Fisher vs Allen 2, the A-sides in AJ and Fisher were both Matchroom fighters, the 2 guys who got the fighting chance until they got demolished. But this time, the Matchroom fighter was Huni, and the Matchroom boy was the B-side this time, and he did not get the fighting chance. So I guess whatever way around the rule is enforced, it ends up going badly for Eddie Hearn. I've watched nothing but a 3-odd minute interview of Eddie Hearn after the Wardley vs Huni fight, because I just can't be arsed at the moment, can't even remember what platform the interview was on. And I remember Eddie Hearn seeming rather nonchalant and he wasn't complaining about the stoppage at all. Either Eddie has actually been reasonable for once and understands that the referee discretion has been in his favour in the past, which I doubt, or the more likely variable, Eddie Hearn is, pardon the Gen Z terminology here, black-pilled in regards to his heavyweight stable. I went in about Matchroom's heavyweight stable in that big Eddie Hearn video I did the other month. Then I followed up on the matter in the Fisher vs Allen 2 reaction. But this Wardley vs Huni result has just fulfilled my prophecies even further. But I'm not going to get too excited about that because the proclamations I made about Matchroom's heavyweight roster weren't that profound. Plus, I can't be bothered to keep talking about Eddie Hearn to be honest. If you haven't been watching all my content and you are fast to listen to me go in on Eddie Hearn's heavyweight stable and predict its further downfall, I'm going to link the big Eddie Hearn video and my Fisher vs Allen 2 fight reaction in the description. For that long video, I obviously talk about loads of other stuff in there, but just skip on over to the heavyweight timestamp. I know Eddie Hearn has signed the yet-to-debut Leo Atang and has got Dave Allen on a little 2-fight deal since that first Eddie Hearn video I did, but let's not act like that brings Matchroom's heavyweight stable a smidgen closer to that of Queensbury's. Just to go back to the early stoppage talks for Fabio Wardley vs Justis Huni though, the situation in itself was not corrupt as no rules were actually broken, but people are justified to call it corrupt because the stoppage did highlight corruption, as you know that the rules would have been bended in a different scenario, or if the roles were reversed in that very fight. As for the co-main event of the Wardley vs Huni fight night, we saw Pierce O'Leary defeat Liam Dillon by a unanimous decision to become the new European super lightweight champ. And you know I've got to keep up with the Irish fighters climbing their way up the world ranks. Now this fight was a bit of a weird one. I did kind of enjoy it, but I'm torn between whether we should be criticising O'Leary for not getting the stoppage, or praising O'Leary for a dominant decision win, and praising Liam Dillon for his great level of toughness to make it the distance, and making the fight competitive. Pierce O'Leary is a world ranked super lightweight, and Liam Dillon is pretty much a career super featherweight. O'Leary is naturally much bigger and stronger than Dillon, and O'Leary is the undefeated up-and-comer who came in as the big favourite. Now, I only gave Liam Dillon 1 round in the fight, which was the second round, but in all those rounds that I did give to O'Leary was getting caught with quite a few punches from Dillon in some of those rounds, some nice little uppercuts and stuff from Dillon. But O'Leary won the rounds because he landed the better shots and his punches were clearly just more effective, had more weight behind them. It's funny because O'Leary was effective with the body shots in the fight, and one might credit Liam Dillon for being able to withstand those body shots from the bigger man. But to me, O'Leary should have went to the body more than he actually did because of how effective those shots were. Of course, I don't know ish about boxing, so the things I'm going to want to see in a fight are going to be things that are going to make a fighter more vulnerable to shots or lead them to be gassed out. I don't know about boxing smart, of course, but to me, O'Leary should have just started going ham on the body of Dillon. Pause. And just throw 4-punch combos to the body and not give Dillon a chance to breathe. And if O'Leary was getting caught with shots to the chin, amidst throwing big flurries to the body, well, he was getting caught anyway. I'm almost certain that if O'Leary was even more persistent to the body than what we saw, he would have got Liam Dillon out of there at one point. Because he'd land 1 or 2 good ones at a time, and Dillon would hunch over and give a little smile to cover up a grimace and move around a bit. And if O'Leary just stuck it on him in those instances, I doubt we would have seen the smaller man in Dillon surviving that. I also had the feeling that O'Leary was cruising to victory a bit as the fight went on. He was on his way to a win anyway, so he isn't obliged to take the risk and go crazy for a stoppage. But to me, that isn't my favourite type of fight to watch. One where we know one guy was on his way to winning on points. It's funny because in round 9, when we could already tell that O'Leary wasn't going for the stoppage, Barry Jones on commentary said that what O'Leary rivals would say about this fight is that O'Leary couldn't knock out a super featherweight. What rivals, mate? That's just what you're saying. Barry Jones should have just said with his chest that he reckons that O'Leary ought to be getting this guy out of there. In round 11, if I remember correctly, O'Leary finally did hone in on the body a bit more. Didn't go as crazy as my casual self would have wanted him to, but I reckon if he had a round like that earlier in the fight, then he could have got the stoppage later on. But either way, when the fight went the distance, O'Leary won by a unanimous decision to become the new EBU European champ at 10 stone. That's no small feat. So I don't want to come across as negative about a win. I know my tone might come across a bit negative in this video because Fabio Wardley and Pierce O'Leary were both winners on the night, and I've not been too complimentary about either of them. But if this Irishman is going to go on to be a world champion in this ultra competitive 140 pound division, I would kind of expect him to stop Liam Dillon. But a win is a win. O'Leary is European champion now, and this fight would have upped his rankings within the WBC top 15. O'Leary has no obligation to take risks to win in a certain fashion. The important thing for his career is that he won. He's still undefeated, and he continues to climb up the ranks, and he did look like he could have stopped Dillon if he wanted to. I'm just a bit of a casual, and I want to see guys go buck wild for the stoppage, I guess. But the thing is, I'm not the only one. I'm not saying that this fight was boring though, and I'm not saying that it wasn't a decent performance, and I do indeed look forward to tuning into the Irishman's next fight. Later in the night, we had the Abdullah Mason vs Jeremiah Nakatila card on Top Rank, which was meant to be the Keyshawn Davis vs Edwin De Los Santos card, and mental scenes obviously went down that night, controversy outside of the ring, and it was a great deal of controversy that also led to that main event being changed. I'll link my reaction to that fight night in the description down below. And I'll just say now that in my pre-fight video for that card, reacting to the cancellation of Keyshawn Davis vs Edwin De Los Santos, I referenced false news about how the Kelvin Davis fight would be moved to the main event as opposed to the Abdullah Mason fight when the Keyshawn fight got cancelled. But of course, Mason did main event as he should have. However, the aftermath of the Kelvin Davis fight is what really stole all the headlines coming out of that fight night, as opposed to Abdullah Mason's great performance. And the next morning we had 2 big stars over in Japan and Australia respectively in world title fights, both of which would have been on Sunday night over in that side of the world of course. The freeweight world champion Junto Nakatani became a unified champ for the first time when he unified his WBC bantamweight title with Ryosuke Nishida's IBF belt. That was a fun fight. Beautiful violence in there as Nishida did have the courage to engage with Nakatani, so the two men had a fun scrap until Nakatani inevitably stopped Nishida. It was a very bad swelling on Nishida's eye that led to that fight being stopped after round 6. Proper beat down there. That was a very good fight in what was a unification and involved a very big name. But the result was exactly what we expected, so nothing to go too crazy about there. And same with the Jai Opetaia fight in Australia later that day. Opetaia defended his IBF Cruiserweight title against Claudio Squeo, and Opetaia was almost guaranteed to get the stoppage there, was very tipped to get it done early. And Opetaia would break Squeo's jaw in round 5, and Squeo quit by staying down for the count. So it was a good win for Jai. Jai Opetaia himself fought on from that same injury in the first Breeders fight, but the difference here is that Squeo was never going to win that fight. And Squeo looked like a very undersized cruiserweight in there, so there are levels and that result was very predictable of course. Squeo ain't a bum or anything because he came into the fight with an undefeated record and was ranked high enough to contest for the IBF belt, but again, there are levels here. As for what both the Nakatani and the Opetaia results mean for both of the winners, well, Nakatani is a unified bantamweight champ now, with 2 belts. So in theory, the next step for him would be to fully unify and become undisputed champ at bantamweight. But the other two belts are held by two different fighters, in the WBO champ Yoshiki Takei, and the current WBA title holder is Antonio Vargas. And I've heard that Takei has a WBO mandatory to deal with, so Takei and Vargas won't be unifying anytime soon. So becoming undisputed at bantamweight will be a 2-fight mission for Junto Nakatani. However, all everyone can talk about when it comes to Junto Nakatani is a super fight against the undisputed super bantamweight champ Naoya Inoue, after Inoue fights Akhmed Aliev, of course. So Nakatani won't have the time to become undisputed at 118 before going up to fight Inoue at 22, because it's looking like Inoue has no more than 2 fights at 22 before going up to 26. And as for Opetaia, well, most boxing fans tend not to criticise his recent lack of quality of opponent, because as far as we know, he's been chasing the unification with Zurdo Ramirez for some time and hasn't been able to get it. As in, Zurdo's basically ducking him. So it's not as if Opetaia just wants to become some one belt champ who looks to defend the belt against anyone who can get sanctioned. But now, as some of you may know, my very next video will be a look into who the next undisputed champion in boxing will be across all of the weight classes. So we'll get into the ins and outs of potential unifications for both Opetaia and Nakatani amongst others in that video. So please do subscribe if you haven't already to stay tuned for that. Speaking of upcoming videos, of course, both of my last 2 videos before this one have been based around Keyshawn Davis. My reaction to his weight miss and fight cancellation, and subsequently my reaction to the backstage brawl. I didn't intend to base my content around Keyshawn Davis that much on the weekend with how much was going on in boxing. Big heavyweight fight here in the UK, the British heavyweight scene is how a lot of young casuals in Britain like me actually got into the sport, so it's always going to be of interest. And you guys know I've been loving my Japanese boxing lately, and there was a literal world title unification there. But controversy trumps all, man, so the Keyshawn Davis thing is naturally what consumed me the most, I'll be honest. And Keyshawn Davis's fight also wasn't even the only notable fight to be taking place that night that got cancelled. The Pro Box TV main event got cancelled due to Justin Pauldo missing weight, and Adam Azim's fight on the Callum Simpson undercard got cancelled due to his opponent getting caught for banned weight cutting methods. But yeah, the Keyshawn Davis stuff was just a standout story. And on that note, although my 2 videos about Keyshawn Davis got a decent level of engagement, and nobody in my comments accused me of such a thing, do let me know if I am overreacting to this situation and acting like it's more than it is. Because not only have I been an avid combat sports fan since my early teens, but I've also spent a lot of time watching content about controversial moments that have happened throughout combat sports history before my time. So in isolation, Keyshawn's backstage crash out isn't the craziest thing in the world at all. We've seen worse. But when we look at the bigger picture, i.e. the fact that Keyshawn did all that on a night that he was meant to be fighting on, and how this fight came to be cancelled, and how the boxing world already turned on him because of that, the weekend that Keyshawn Davis and the 3 Davis brothers as a whole had is very much newsworthy. It has a lot of story to it, whether you're outraised by it all, entertained by it all, or a bit of both. So I'll compare the Keyshawn Davis backstage attack to the Wardley vs Huni knockout controversy, in that Huni getting counted out there is not crazy at all in isolation, but when you consider how the fight was going until that point, and how much of a fighting chance other heavyweights have got on British soil recently, the count out was kinda crazy and is valid to be up in arms about. Keyshawn Davis flipping the nut backstage is nothing major, but it is when you consider the context leading up to that moment. Now, the Keyshawn Davis content isn't over. We will cover it more here at O.M.E Boxing, but as much as I try to be versatile as I can with my content, I'm not a breaking news journalist per se, so I do want to do a bit of a hit piece on Keyshawn, but I'll be damned if I get like 8,000 words into a script of a whole breakdown of his crash out and then something else comes out in the news that changes everything. So I'm going to leave it for a bit and see if anything else comes out about the aftermath of Saturday night before I get into that work. I'm going to try and cover everything in that one, including how various people in the boxing media have reacted to the situation, so we're really going to get into it. Should be a long one. And speaking of long videos of mine, that Bobby Pacquiao video I posted last week, you guys need to watch that one, man.
But the views are embarrassing. That's why I'm trying to plug it now.
Shout out to all the real ones who have already liked and commented on that joint, but we got to get the views up on that one, man. So amongst all the videos linked in the description, that one will be at the top. Or you can just click on it here on the end screen. So yeah, go watch that one now if you haven't already, and you have been listening to O.M.E Boxing.